lived on one of the main islands, and we could drive around the perimeter of the island in an hour and a half. The main island where the capital city is, there's 70,000 people on the chief island where the capital city is. You can drive around the whole island in an hour and a half. And then when you get on some of the more remote islands where you don't have a lot of businesses and you don't have the government, you're seeing a lot less vehicles, if any at all. And so the big need for churches and preachers is because a lot of people there can't travel that far. Sometimes it's not exactly reasonable to ask them to walk 2 or 3 hours, which is one of the big pushes right now, is to have a church and a preacher on, first of all, on every inhabited island, and second of all, in every village. Because we want every village to have the preached word of God in their midst. So preaching is still a big need in the nation of Vanuatu. I also want to talk to you about some building projects that we work in over there. There's a number of building projects currently going on, many of which we were able to help out with, or should I say only some of which we were able to help out with. What you see there on the top is the brand new, what they're calling the headquarters. I can't remember the exact name of it. They have a long name for it based on one of the donors who donated a good sum of money for it. But this is the new amphitheater that they built. And one of the reasons they built this is because the headquarters church used to sit on that property right there. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, a cyclone came along and ripped the headquarters church to the ground, didn't leave a wall standing, just tore the building into shreds. And obviously they had to clear it away, couldn't have church there anymore. I am pleased to say that the Sunday after the hurricane, they set up a tent and had about a record attendance.
All right.
So the storm can't stop the work of God. Praise the Lord.
Praise God.
But even with that, they had a burden to build this. And so they built this new amphitheater. This was finished while we were over there. And it was finished about a week before their general conference. And because it was, back up one more slide. And because it was finished right then, we were able to sit a large amount of people. I think we had over 1,000 people at their general conference, which is a big statistic for a country of 270,000 people.
All right.
1,000 people is a lot. So God is still working, but there's still work to be done. On the bottom there, you see the Bible school. The Bible school is on the same property as the headquarters church. And that also received significant water damage during that particular hurricane. And so this is where it looks like now. Obviously, they finished the outdoors. They finished some of the insulation and whatnot and painting it. But inside, there's still a lot of unfinished rooms that were affected by the water. And so there is a classroom running. There's 1 or 2 offices that are opened up. But there's still a lot of work to be done. So keep in mind these many building projects. And one of the reasons why it's so significant, and I have such a burden to pray for these building projects, is because some of the Ni Vanuatu, that means born in Vanuatu, so a national in Vanuatu, a lot of the Ni Vanuatu are helping out with projects like these at the expense of their own churches. So some of them are going to churches that, I'm not exaggerating when I say consist of 4 poles and a tarp. And they're having church in the open air, and some of them don't even have that. They're just meeting in a field somewhere or in someone's home. And so this is one of the reasons why I have a big burden for some of the building projects that are happening over there. Going to the next slide, I want to talk about General Conference because a lot happened at this General Conference. You can see there, Brother Doug Kleindens came and he preached. He has preached there the last several years. The Ni Vanuatu always vote on who they want to come. In the past, I think 7 or 8 years in a row, they voted for Brother Doug Kleindens. So he's been coming over there several times. And just doing a magnificent work. But what I want to talk about with General Conference is where they ordain their ministers, and they have their licensing seminars. And so at this most recent General Conference, there was 8 new ministers licensed and ordained. And these are ministers that are going out to some of these remote islands that I talked about. These are ministers that are going out to what we call the bush, some islands that don't even have electricity, and going out and pastoring and starting brand new churches, sometimes walking into villages sight unseen to preach the gospel. And so there is a big need right now for training for these ministers who are going out to these remote areas that some of us cannot reach. Immediately after that, we had the prayer conference One of the reasons I want to point that out, that's Brother Alan and Georgine Shawn there on the left. They they're missionaries in Malaysia. And they came over and did a spiritual warfare conference. Now on the top there, the majority, not all, but the majority of the ministers on the top there are people who live in what we call the bush, on the remote islands. And they're the ones who are going out and who are working in some of the very remote areas. Now, the reason I bring this up, on the bottom right there, you can see a camera. One of the things that we did with that is we are developing materials. Right now, especially for the islands that have electricity, we are trying to send these bush pastors out with resources. Because when you are in that remote area where not many things are available to you, if electricity is barely available, there's a high chance the internet isn't. There's a high chance that you might not even have a cell phone. And so what we're doing is we're trying to send these ministers out with whatever resources we can. So if there's one pastor on an island and we can send him out with a thumb drive full of materials, that's one of the things that we're trying to do. So we're trying to record things like the prayer conference so they can go back to their churches and they can share at these conferences with the people who couldn't afford to come to the main island for conference. And one of the things that we're working with right now over there in the nation of Vanuatu, and we will continue to help out when we're over there, is developing some of those materials to send out to the bush. I also want to talk about some miscellaneous work. On the left there, you see us working with the youth. We did a couple of events with the youth. One of the reasons it's such a big need to work with the youth of Vanuatu is because education in Vanuatu is not mandatory. So if your family cannot afford it, or you just want to be a rebellious child and not go, you don't have to, with zero repercussions. However, we who are adults know, that lack of education sometimes means lack of job. Why would you get hired if you can't read or write?
Right.
And so the same thing that happens with uneducated youths in America happens over there. What do they get involved with? They get involved with drugs, they get involved with nightlife, and some of it's for them, not because they chose it, but because their families couldn't even afford it. And so one of the big needs with the youth is that while we're over there, while we're working with the youth of Vanuatu, it's not just providing them with a community, but it's also providing them with a unique learning experience that they might not have gotten otherwise.
Okay.
So when we sit down with them and have Bible studies, and we sit down with them and we have youth sessions, and we have teaching sessions, we're not only just providing biblical truth, we're also providing them with basic skills, sometimes like reading and writing, that are necessary for them to get good jobs and for them to stay off the streets. And so that's one of the reasons there's a big need to working with the youth in Vanuatu, especially on the remote islands. On the main island, there's a bit more education, but on the remote islands, it's even worse. On the other side, you see Bible quizzing. Going back, you see Bible quizzing. One of the reasons this is significant is because this year, while we were over there, now this was a coincidence, this was not planned, this is just how God works. But while we were over there this year, they had their first Bible quiz meet in 14 years. It had started out under a previous missionary, but there wasn't enough local support, and so it kind of dropped off. And then one local Ni Vanuatu Sunday school director had a burden. She remembered when she was a young person watching them. She wasn't involved, but she was still a Sunday school teacher at the time. She remembered the passion that she saw the kids had when they quizzed. So she started developing the stuff with the few materials she had, some of which are 15, 16, 17, 20 years old, some of them. And she's working with the kids there, and they had their first Bible quiz meet in 14 years. The reason I bring this up is because sometimes God knows what He's preparing us for.
Right.
I quizzed for 2 years, once in the state of Maine and once in the state of Missouri, and I was also a coach for 1 year. And because of that experience, I had resources and I had knowledge that they didn't have and that the missionary didn't have.
Awesome.
And so God knew what He was preparing me for well before I did.
That's right.
You don't know what you're doing right now that God might use
That's right.
in 10, 15 years.
All right.
But that's another sermon. But the reason I bring that up is because that's developing right now, and I worked a little bit with that Sunday school director, and we're trying to get that back off the ground. There's a very positive response, and I think that it's going to launch very quickly. Going to the next slide, I also just want to talk very briefly about some of the friendship and the fellowship that we had over there. These are a couple of pictures. One there, you see Sister Anne-Marie Siabon sitting with Jennifer, my wife, and they are making a traditional meal called lap lap that you bake in the ground underneath hot stones, and it is very good. You can't put that much coconut milk in something and it not be good.
All right.
Hallelujah. But it was very delicious. And we learned how to make it a couple of different ways, and we're going to see if we can figure out how to make it in a traditional oven. We can't just have hot stones in the ground everywhere we go. But we'll figure it out, bless the Lord. We also see there on the top right, we did another outing with the youth. This was a different outing that we went on. We went to the other side of the island to do a little bit of exploring. The man you see there, sitting there with his thumb up, that is one of the musicians in one of the churches. He is the one who taught me the songs that you heard tonight. And then on the bottom right, you see us with one of the local pastors at a farewell dinner that they had for us shortly before we left, that we had a farewell dinner. And one of the reasons I bring all of these things up is it's important the work that we're doing over there. Okay? This is a well-developed work, to be sure. There have been missionaries there, UPCI missionaries there for over 30 years. But that being said, you have an effect on an island like this far greater when you go over there and you sit down on a grass mat outside and you cook food in the open air and you sit and talk. What was the thing? Discipleship smells like food? And every single one of these instances you saw, there was much eating involved.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
We had lots of eating. And every single one of these events, there was certain, what I would call discipleship, some of them, but some of them was just encouragement of fellow ministers. And I was sitting there, and we're talking the language as much as we can. It's very small right now, but we're trying our best. And we're sitting there, and we're eating the food. And at every single one of these events, we were afforded unique ministerial opportunities that we would never have gotten from across the pulpit, that we would have never have gotten if we weren't sitting alongside of them, that we would never have gotten if we weren't in the country and working, sitting on the floor on grass mats with them. So this is one of the big reasons that it's important that we're over there and we're working and we're fellowshipping with them and not kind of just speaking from afar, if you will. One of the last things I want to talk about is the Bible school work there. Now, no, it's not a bad colored picture. That's actually what the background looks like. That's because the missionary there has a burden to set up a professional film studio. What I was talking about, recording Bible school lectures and recording other things to send out to some of these remote islands. The eventual goal, now this was just started while we were over there, but the eventual goal is that we would be able to record entire Bible school courses in Bislama, the language of Vanuatu, and be able to send them out to these remote islands. And so they can be training up young ministers, and they can be training up people. And again, in a country where education is not mandatory, every single instance like this is a learning and an educational experience that they might just not have gotten otherwise. And so what we're doing there, that's called a chroma key. I won't get into all of it, but it's a filming and editing technique that we use, and we're going to use that to set up a professional studio. We can make professional, high-quality videos and send them out to some of these remote islands. Obviously, some of them don't have electricity, but as the ones that get electricity, we are sending those out to them right now, which is more than you would think. And so the reason I mention this last is because this will be the majority of our work while we are over there. The majority of what we will be doing is teaching in the Bible school, 1, and 2, developing this kind of distance setup while we are over there. And finally, I just want to mention that the work is continuing in Vanuatu. And you see the missionaries there on the right. That's Peter and Robin Gratian. And I want us to pray for them because we're over here evangelizing and raising money to go back, but they're over there still laboring in the field. And he's gotten a lot more responsibilities on his plate since his last deputation. And so he's on a shoestring budget himself. And so they're just doing the work that God has sent them over there to do. But the work is continuing. Jennifer and I are blessed to go into a work very much doing the ministry of Apollos. Seeds have already been planted, and we're there doing some watering. We're there doing some culturing and some fertilizing and just growing what's already been planted. But when I was over there, I'll never forget a conversation I had the very first week that we were there. We were there on the headquarters property, and a pastor, one of the local Vanuatu pastors by the name of Robert David, a very Vanuatu name, I know. If you practice, maybe you can pronounce it, Robert David. You can laugh at that as a joke. One of the pastors over there, I was asking him about the work there, because he's pastoring a local church, and I said, how many churches do you have? And he said, well, and he started counting his head. He said, well, if you count churches and preaching points, or maybe daughter works, if you will, so a local church sending out some of their ministers to these other islands. He said, if you count churches and daughter works, he said, we have over 50. And I was shocked. I said, this is a nation of 270,000